If you've already made this bag that I showed you yesterday, stop what you're doing, grab those scraps that you might have thrown out, and we'll do something with them. Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Yesterday I showed you how to make this bag. I've come into my room this morning all inspired to do something new, and I've seen the offcuts from the box corners lying on my table. And since I don't like to waste fabric, I figured we might as well do a project with these. When we cut out the box corners here yesterday, I think they were about 6 centimetres, and we've cut them out in one long rectangle. We're going to do a project with that because I don't want to waste any of this fabric. It was really pretty too. As somebody that sews for a living, I want to try to prevent the amount of wastage that I have and also save all of the other fabric from going to landfill that I collect. My mission today is to throw out as little fabric as possible. That's why we're going to use up these box corners. So today we're going to make a couple of little pouches out of box corners just to use up the fabric. So we have the lining pieces, I have the fabric pieces left over, and they were good enough to come stabilised, so let's get to it. I will put measurements on the screen for you if you want to make these from scratch. They're going to be really simple to do. The other thing I'm going to use is a regular dress zip. That's it there. It's going to be way too long for the bag, but rather than having wastage for the zip, we're going to make a little tab handle out of the zipper tape that's left over. Let's get to it. From the bag I made yesterday, I ended up with 4 pieces of fabric from the 4 corners that I've cut out, and the same with the lining. The only thing I'm going to add extra are a couple of swivel clips because I think I'd like these to be able to hang from a bag, and a couple of zips. So if you want to make this from scratch and you don't have any box corner offcuts yet, I'm making 2 bags. I'll set that aside. So to make one bag, you'll need 2 outer pieces that are 13 by 8 centimetres or 5 by 3 inches. We will also want some stabiliser on the back of that. That will be the same size. I've just used a really lightweight fleecy. And then you want 2 lining pieces that are also 13 by 8 centimetres or 5 by 3 inches. The zip I'm using is 18 centimetres or 7 inches. And with the offcut of the zipper tape, I'm going to use a swivel clip and make a little tab out of the remainder of the zip. Let's get started. So if you're making these from scratch, you'll want to go and fuse your stabiliser to the outer fabric. And if you sew to sell, then pop some labels on. I've already gone and done that. This is going to be super quick to do. Most of it's already prepared. Now I'm going to mark in my seam allowances for this project just to show you what I'm doing. I am going to be including this metal end of the zip here. So I'll turn the fabric to the wrong side and I'm going to mark in my seam allowance. This is such a tiny little pouch that I'm just going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance or 6 millimetres. I'll mark that in. I normally wouldn't do this for myself, but to give you an idea of how this is going to work, I think it's easier to show you with all the markings in place. I'm not going to use my traditional method for zips today. My tab is going to stay on the zip. If I show you with the seam allowance here, we want to have this metal tab as close to our stitching line as we can without actually sewing over it. I'm going to make a mark for what will be my stitching line, and that's probably about 1/8 inch away from that metal tab. And I've gone and marked that same 1/4 inch line just on the front of the fabric as well. Now I've run some double-sided tape just on the edge of the fabric here. My seam allowances are here and here. I want my zip to finish here, and then my slider obviously needs to be set back. From my seam allowance on the front left-hand side, I'm going to measure 1 centimetre, and on this side I'll do the same. When we put this together, we're going to have the pieces like that. So we've got our 1/4 inch seam allowance or 6 millimetres, and then we've got a 3/8 inch or 1 centimetre. I'm going to measure the distance from this seam allowance to the end of the zip here, and that's about 4 inches or 10 centimetres, just a smidge over. I'm going to measure the zip to the same length. So from the end of the zip here up to here, I've measured that same distance. open your zip and move the slide so that it's within that area there. And where that yellow line is, you'll take this tape here and fold it under so that the coil edge of the tape is in line with that mark we've made. And we'll repeat that for this side. And when we close our zip, that's as far as it's going to go. Now you can do this by hand or machine. I'm going to take this over to the machine and just sew straight across here to secure that little triangle in place. And I'll do that on both sides. All right, those corners have been stitched in place. At the moment, this isn't going to stop your zip from going on, okay? So just be careful if you end up cutting your tape so that you don't play around with your zip. Take our outer fabric. We've got the front and the back, and we've got just one side marked 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre in from the seam line. I'm going to line up that seam line right along the edge there. And I've lined up my zip up to that yellow line that I have on my fabric. Pop some more double-sided tape over the top of that. If you don't have it, just use pins and grab your lining and place that directly over the top. You can see the end of my zip has a little bit of an overhang. That's fine, I'll be trimming that off later. And make sure that the zip is folded over and that you continue that lining directly over the top, and we can clip that in place. Let's take this to the machine and we'll sew all the way across. I've got my zipper foot on. I'm starting at the finished end of the zip. Then we'll work our way up to where we folded the zip. As you get to the point where your zip has been folded out, you can help that a little bit more just by holding it in place. I'll sew over it, but then I'll go back over it again and then forward again. And you can see here that that curved edge has been folded in and it's in between the lining and the outer fabric. We'll cut this off shortly. What we can do now is top stitch. So I've got the lining and the outer fabric behind each other. When I top stitch, I'm not going to top stitch right to the very edge. I'm coming in just on this side of the seam allowance. I'm not sure how this is going to play out when I put the side seams together, so I don't want to have too much bulk there. And I'll do the same at this end. I'm going to stop just before the stitching line. So with that secured in place now, we can cut off this excess. And we won't throw that away. Now we'll do the other side. Remove that double-sided tape, and I'm going to line up the zip the same way I did with the other side. I've got a marking on my zip here. I'm going to line that up with the seam allowance that I've marked. As I come up to that mark I've made on the other side, I'll fold the rest of the zipper tape over, hold that in place. I'll run another bit of double-sided tape over that, and we'll grab the other lining piece and place that down as well. And we'll sew along there and then top stitch. And this time I'm going to start at the end where the zip comes out, because I like to sew with the stabilised fabric on top. Back stitch, and then continue on. And once again I will top stitch from just this side of the stitching line. Okay, the top stitching is done on both sides. I can trim off that other bit of excess tape. And using this and our swivel clip, we're going to make a little tab. Pop your zipper tape through your clip and we can fold that in half and attach it to one side of our little pouch. Move the lining away from the outer fabric and I'll clip that in place. You can make this as long or short as you need to. If you used a really long zip and you had lots of excess, then you might be able to curl it over enough so that you can make a little wristlet strap. But this is all that we have from this one. What I'm going to do is take this to the machine and just sew really close to the end to secure that in place. And I'll go and do that now. All right, the tab's in place. We can trim off any excess at the side there, and you can trim off the excess on your zip as well. And I think I'd like to round the corners on this. Turn that upside down. We can just mark a curve here. Doesn't matter what size you use. Place the two outer pieces together. And we can trim that curve at both ends, and then we'll do the same for the lining. With our curves cut, bring the outer edges together and your lining. We're going to leave an opening at the bottom for turning the right way around. So I'll leave a small opening just in here that's about 2 inches, maybe a bit less. I'll line up the side seam here, and you can see where I didn't stitch right to the very end. I just like to let that fabric sit loosely over the edge there, and as I'm sewing I can manipulate these edges here with my screwdriver or an awl or a stiletto, whatever you might have, and help that to sit down as I sew past it. As I sew past, I always go forward, back and forward. So what we'll do here is sew all the way around with a back stitch at the beginning and the end. On this side I've got the tab. Just want to make sure I bring those folded edges together and that the tab is sitting down inside the bag. We don't want to sew over the swivel clip. And along here, I'll just let that sit loosely and I'll manipulate it, as I said, with my screwdriver as I go over it. And on this end here, we've got that little metal tab from the zipper end. You want to make sure that you don't stitch anywhere near that. So we've made sure that that's inside our bag area, and we're only going to be sewing 1/4 of an inch. Just check that before you get to it at the machine. I'm going to leave my zipper foot on because it's a lot narrower. It means that I'll be able to sew over this section here a lot more comfortably. Back stitch. I'm just making sure that my zipper tape is lining up on the side there. This area here that hasn't been top stitched, you can see that it's a bit loose there. I just run my screwdriver in between the layers, bring that forward and hold that taut. And I've also made a little mark here, which is where the metal tabs are on my zip end. So I'm going to make sure I don't sew anywhere along this side. Something I should have mentioned before we've sewn this together is that you really need to make sure your zip is open. Luckily I've come across this and seen it before I finished sewing up the bag. So open up your zip, because there's no way I would be able to turn this the right way around with it closed. I've got that little side tab here, so I'm going to go over that a couple of times. And as I come up to the section where the zipper end is, again I've got that loose flap on the lining, and I'll just use my screwdriver to feed that underneath. And we're done. All right, that's been sewn up all the way around. I've got my little opening in here. Before we turn it the right way around, we are going to trim really close to the edge. And we can turn it the right way. And hopefully, unlike me, you've actually remembered to leave your zip open. Once you've rounded your corners nicely, poked the edges out at the top here, we can take the opening, fold those raw edges in underneath, go to the machine and just sew that small section closed. The other thing I'm going to do on the side here where the zip curves in on the end, I don't like the way the lining is sitting. I'm not really sure how to make that look any prettier. What I'm going to do is where I've done the top stitching, I'm just going to go from here over to here, top stitch those edges together, and that will help that lining sit down a little bit more flat. It's just something that I want to do. I don't think it's probably not really necessary, but I don't like the way the lining sits up like that. So I'll close up the bottom and I will just stitch straight across here. Okay, I've closed the bottom up and I've just gone and sewn right across here, and it does look a little bit neater on the inside. There we have two little coin pouches made out of the boxed bag corners that were going to be thrown out. So the waist stitch that I have from this original boxed bag, which was going to be all of this, is now just this. Well, actually not even this. I'm going to keep this tape here because I can reuse those on the ends of some other bags. But this is all the waist stitch that I have from the cutout of this box bag and these pieces here. So I'm pretty pleased with myself. All of this has been prevented from going into landfill. Well, I did not expect to come into my room this morning and be using offcuts to do a video project, but I am really pleased with how they've turned out. A couple of tiny little coin pouches made from fabric that I usually throw in the bin, and I'm now going to get to sell these. I will sell these for $10 each in the shop. That's potentially $20 that would have ended up in landfill, and I would never have known. I'm going to rethink the way I do my box bags now. I try to be conscientious of the waist stitch that I do have, but this is now going to make me think even harder about the waist stitch that I have when I cut things off. I do keep lots of little pieces for my scrap projects, but I don't usually keep the fabric that is already stabilised. I'm going to look at things a little bit differently now. Rather than throwing things out, I sew for a living, so it's silly for me to throw all of these really good bits out in the bin. I can actually earn more income from it. So having these little clips on the end there means you can attach it to your key ring or your bags. What I wish I had have thought of doing, and if you haven't already made this bag, then you can go right ahead and do it. But what I should have done when I was putting the contrast fabric together is put a little tab here with a D-ring, and then I could have attached the matching box corner fabric to the side of the bag. You could make a little pocket tissue pouch holder, chapstick holder, a coin purse like this, and attach it to your bag. I'm going to do that in a future video with some other box bag that I do. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Just something really quick. It didn't even occur to me to use up these box corners. Now that I've done these, I expect to see both your bags and your little coin pouches on our Facebook group by the morning. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.